Tuareg movie recaps.
Set in Ireland, the film introduces us to Donald, a middle-aged man who lives on a farm with his elderly mother Florence. Apart from taking care of her, Donald dedicates himself to his farm, hunting animals and repairing cars in his workshop. However, his neighbor cannot pay in full to repair his car. In compensation, he gives him a damaged beach van that he can sell for good money once he repairs it, while he donates the inspection to his neighbor, telling her that he can use it to travel around El País and have fun. Although Donald is very loyal to her mother that night, Florence reads the obituaries calmly when she discovers that everyone she knows was dying due to her advanced age. This depresses her a little, so Donald offers her comfort, although the old woman doesn't want to feel like a bother, so the man goes out to a bar to have a few drinks and try his luck with the bartender Lisa. Unfortunately, her flirtations are interrupted by a group of drunk men, wreaking havoc when Lisa approaches her table cleaning. A drunk young man begins to harass her. Immediately, where he stands up to defend her, to which the young abuser responds with ridicule because he is still living with his mother before things got any worse, an insult made to the young boy when he returns home, where he dedicates himself fully to making amends. They go and turn it into a mini-home to take their mother to the beach, where they used to go with their late father. But when he shows her work to Florence, she claims that she can't travel that far because of her age. I listen a little to her son's feelings, although she returns shortly after with some beers. To apologize, Donald drinks so many beers that he ends up falling asleep in his dream. He sees himself immersed in the forest hunting an animal, only that his prey was his mother, who screamed for help as soon as she woke up. He sees a mysterious man in a trench coat leaving the farm with another suspect. When Donald enters the house, he discovers the body of his brutally murdered mother. Despite the shock of that event, he must be interviewed by the police, so he tells them about the suspects. But the officers are not very helpful. Days after his mother's funeral, where his uncle Eamon stood by his side, Donald from a vehicle stopping at the entrance to his farm and then speeding off into the evening while tidying up his mother's room begins to hear strange things in outside, so he comes out to inspect with his shotgun. With that he heads to the barn, where he is ambushed by two masked men who disarm him and hang him from a beam so that everyone will believe that he went out of his way. The problem is that the murderers will be rookies and they didn't arrange the rope properly, so Donald landed on the ground as if nothing had happened. Then the masked men separate the protagonist. Fix that mistake, which the man takes advantage of to attack 1.1 big hammer after a small struggle where he encloses the criminal's head in a capo and then smashes it with hammer blows. As for the other killer, Donald neutralizes him easily and removes his mask. To his surprise, it was nothing more than a scared young boy named Bart too. That he had accepted money to murder him and that it looked like an accident, but he has no more information. As a result, the man considers calling the police, although when he sees a stain of his mother's blood he considers new measures. Then he returns with Vartools ordering him to speak to his boss on the phone to tell him that the work was completed and to make a decision. Meeting for tomorrow. The next day, after burying the other murderer, Donald embarks on a trip by Subban with the kidnapped Bartolo. On the way he makes a stop to interrogate the young man about the murder of his mother. However, he does not know anything about that matter, rather he was forced to accept that job because the real murderers kidnapped his sister and threatened to kill her. Upon hearing that, where she invites him to join her revenge mission to also rescue her sister. Now as companions, the duo show up at the meeting bar, where the suspects took Calla, while Donald remains hidden with his shotgun. Bardo reunites with Gavigan and Jerome. The men who hired him Bar all assure them that he murdered Donald and that the evidence is on his partner's phone. But of course, the criminals are distrustful because that other guy didn't come with him. After stating that his partner would come, Bartosz demands to see his sister, but it was not her, but another kidnapped girl who tried to escape. Sofia immediately heard Bartosz subdue, who exclaims that the other murderer was executed by the farmer and then he murdered the farmer. Still, Gavigan punishes him by beating Sofia to death with a hammer while Yerem takes his body to another room where he appears in the hallway and leaves him locked up. After that he surprises Gavigan at the point of a shotgun and, even though he does not recognize him as the murderer of his mother, he knocks him out to take him away in his van in the middle of a lonely forest. Donald, prepare a stew for him and Vartools. Just then Gavigan awakens for the interrogation, although he only insults Florence's memory in response. The farmer places the hot pot on his face so that he learns to respect. After that torture, Gavigan confesses that his superiors Trevor and Franklin wanted to kill Donald for a reason that he does not know. In fact, they were both Florence's murderers. While trying to understand why they did that, Donald goes out to urinate, something that Gavigan takes advantage of to flee through the forest. After he frees his hands, Gavigan calls Trevor and Franklin to report his situation. On the other hand, Bartolo goes to hunt Gavigan, although he surprises him from behind and pins him to the ground. Just when he was about to execute him, Donalo distracts him with his shotgun, which Barths takes advantage of to stab Gavigan in his bed of death. The criminal shows some remorse and reveals that Calla was known as Alicia in his group. For his part, Jerome meets with Franklin Trevor to tell them that Vartools is looking for his sister. The problem is that he doesn't know her name. Well, there are too many prostitutes in her group, so Frank assigns Trevor the mission of finding her. We return to Donald and Bartosz to see how they bury Gavigan. When the criminal's phone ends, he receives a call that Donna answers. On the other side is Frankie, whom the farmer interrogates for the murder of his mother. To her surprise, Frankie reveals that Florence was not as holy as she thought and that she had a target on her back for years in search of the truth. Donald goes to his uncle Eamon to show him a photo of her childhood, in which a man appears who is not her father. Eamon recognizes him as Joe, a man who helped his mother after the loss of his father. Joe's daughter also appears in the photo, who is none other than Frankie. Diamond continues the explanation by revealing that Joe was involved in shady affairs, and even though Florence tried to hide it, he ended up murdered to keep little Donald away. Due to these problems, his mother moved to the country when the protagonist returned to the band. Bartosz conducts his own investigation into Joe. Discovering that he was suspected of multiple political murders, although he still cannot find a connection with his mother, Bartosz then suggests that he call prostitution services and ask for Alicia, since she is his sister and might know where Frankie lives. The plan works, then, where he is summoned to a hotel where he meets with Calla, who at first distrusts him until she hears his brother on the phone. Immediately the two fake an accident to bring the guard, whom Donald Nokia from behind. On the way out, Donald asks Hay for Frankie's location, but the young girl knows nothing, recognizing that Bartosz had tricked him into rescuing his sister. Donald returns to the guard to interrogate him, as the man refuses to speak. The farmer presses a hot iron on his noble parts to make him speak. While Bartosz waits nervously in the van, ignoring what they did, he has just entered the hotel after obtaining the information he wanted. Donnelly flees only to run into Jerome directly. The farmer and the criminal begin a struggle that seemed even until they were pinned to the ground. It seemed like the end of Donald, but suddenly Jerome is struck down thanks to someone who took his gun in the middle of the fight when leaving the hotel, and finally reunites with his brother, and they leave in the van with a dying Donald. Shortly after, Franklin Trevor shows up at the hotel only to discover Jerome's dead body and the guard tortured. Even though that henchman assured him that he had not opened his mouth, Frankie beats him to death. With the plank the next day, Donald wants to continue his crusade for revenge, but Bartosz reminds him that he can barely stand. However, Calla offers her help to thank him for saving her life, so Bartosz reluctantly joins in as well. After that they head to the address the guard told them to keep an eye on him while he waits. Donald deduces that Frankie must believe that Florence had something to do with the murder of her father, Joe, which would explain her bloodlust. Seconds later they see Trevor leaving the location and getting into his car, so they cautiously follow him to Frankie's house. Immediately, Donald prepares himself with his shotgun, but changes his mind when he sees Frankie's little daughter. When they return to the van camp, they see a hitman who almost shoots them, although they manage to escape. Tired of so many threats, Bardas points out to Donald that his mother might not have been as innocent as she thought. He barely hears that. The farmer almost hits him, but silence stops him. Still, Bardas exclaims that they will end up being killed because of him, so Donald throws him and his sister out of the van with some money so they can get by. When Frankie finds out about his hitman's failure, he scolds Trevor for not having killed him. Donald from the beginning, he defends himself by reminding her that he should not kill Florence, but out of sheer annoyance, she sends him back to Donald. We see him return to Love's house only to find him very badly injured from a recent assault. The old man then begs him to stop, as his revenge crusade will only lead to more deaths. Additionally, he reveals that Joe and Florence had an affair, but when Joe's enemies threatened a little Donald, Florence sold her lover to protect her son. After Ammon Donald's death, Frankie's car outside, at the same time she sent a hitman to the house. After a few tense minutes of the woman enters the house finding the hitman unconscious of her. Then Donna surprises her from behind with her shotgun and forces her into her van. Once that is done, he heads towards the beach where Joey was killed. While drinking he receives a call from the henchman from before, who alerts him of Frankie's kidnapping. For his part, a worried Bartosz also goes out to look for Donald. When he arrives at Casa de Amor, the young man runs into Trevor, who asks him about the farmer. Bartolos doesn't know where he is either, but he assures him that if Frankie fell into his power it was late. When Bartosz tries to leave after being knocked out by the hitman at dawn, Donald begins to explain to Frankie why her mother sold Joe while she directs her to a grave he dug himself. When Bartosz tries to leave after being knocked out by the hitman at dawn, Donald begins to explain to Frankie why her mother sold Joe while she directs her to a grave he dug himself. However, Frank reveals that he murdered Florence, but only because the old woman had killed her father. Of course, Donald did not believe her, although the woman explains every detail of how her own mother confessed shortly before she died. It turns out that Florence was so in love with Joe that she murdered him out of jealousy. Although he prioritized his own family, he later called Joe's rival mafia to cover up the incident. Hearing that, Donald continues to point his finger at Frankie, who reminds him that she will orphan a girl and restart the cycle of revenge. Finally, Donald lowers the gun and begins to walk away from him. However, Frank attacks him from behind with a shovel and tries to flee in the van. The farmer immediately chases her and ends up shooting her in self-defense seconds later. He picks a call from her phone. On the other side is Trevor threatening to murder Bardas. Desperate, Donald offers his help in exchange for the young man, although Trevor has already deduced Frankie's murder. Therefore, he gives him the Bartosz phone so that Donald can hear his last words, and thus ends this movie. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and thanks for watching.